Top 20 Cultural Anthropologist Interview Questions and Answers. Unlock insights into the field of cultural anthropology with these top 20 interview questions and expert answers, perfect for candidates preparing to demonstrate their knowledge, experience, and critical thinking. 1. How do you define culture from an anthropological perspective, and how has your understanding evolved over time? Culture, in anthropology, refers to the shared beliefs, behaviors, symbols, and practices that are learned and transmitted across generations within a society. It shapes how people interpret the world and interact with others. Over time, my understanding of culture has evolved from viewing it as a fixed set of traits to seeing it as dynamic, fluid, and contextually constructed. I now appreciate how individuals actively create and negotiate culture, influenced by history, power, and global forces. Fieldwork has shown me that culture is not monolithic but full of internal diversity, contradictions, and change. This evolution informs how I engage with communities and interpret their lived experiences. 2. Can you discuss a cultural theory or framework that has significantly influenced your work? Clifford Geertz's interpretive approach to symbolic anthropology has profoundly influenced my work. His concept of culture as a web of meanings that humans themselves have spun emphasizes the importance of interpreting symbols, rituals, and narratives within their specific cultural contexts. I apply this framework to understand how people create meaning through daily practices and symbolic expressions. Geertz's idea of thick description encourages me to delve deeper into the contextual significance of behaviors rather than merely observing surface actions. This theoretical lens has enhanced my ethnographic writing and has pushed me to consider how people construct and convey meaning in complex, nuanced ways. 3. How do you approach the study of cultural relativism versus ethnocentrism in your research? I approach cultural relativism as a foundational principle in anthropology, ensuring I interpret behaviors, beliefs, and customs within their cultural context rather than judging them by external standards. At the same time, I remain critically aware of the limits of relativism, especially when dealing with human rights concerns. Ethnocentrism can unconsciously influence interpretation, so I continually reflect on my positionality, assumptions, and power dynamics in the research process. I also engage with local perspectives to challenge my viewpoints and reduce bias. My aim is to respect cultural diversity while thoughtfully addressing ethical complexities without imposing a universal or Western-centric framework. 4. What role does symbolic anthropology play in your interpretation of cultural practices? Symbolic anthropology helps me understand how people make sense of their world through symbols, rituals, and narratives. I see culture not just as a system of behaviors, but as a network of meanings communicated through these symbols. This perspective allows me to explore the layers of significance behind everyday practices, such as a wedding ceremony, a food taboo, or religious ritual, revealing how they reflect deeper cultural values and social structures. I draw on theorists like Victor Turner and Clifford Geertz to analyze how symbols express identity, resolve tensions, or reinforce social order. This approach deepens my understanding of cultural nuance and complexity. 5. How do you incorporate intersectionality, race, gender, class, etc., into your anthropological analyses? Incorporating intersectionality into my analyses means recognizing how overlapping identities, such as race, gender, class, sexuality, and ability, interact to shape individual experiences and structural inequalities. I use this framework to move beyond single-axis approaches and to understand how power and privilege operate within and across cultural contexts. For instance, when studying women's roles in rural economies, I analyze how gendered labor is also influenced by class hierarchies and ethnic identities. Intersectionality helps reveal marginalized voices and systemic disparities, allowing for a more inclusive and critical analysis. It also informs my ethical responsibility to represent participants' experiences with depth and complexity. 6. Describe your most challenging fieldwork experience and how you navigated it. One of my most challenging fieldwork experiences occurred in a politically unstable region where trust between locals and outsiders was low. Gaining access to communities was difficult due to suspicion, and I initially faced resistance during interviews. To navigate this, I adopted a patient, relationship-based approach. I spent time participating in community events, listening more than questioning, and collaborating with a trusted local liaison. Over time, people opened up as they saw my genuine intent. I also adjusted my research methods to be less intrusive and more dialogical. This experience taught me the value of cultural humility, flexibility, and mutual respect in fieldwork. 7. What ethnographic methods do you prefer? Participant observation, interviews, surveys, etc., and why? I primarily prefer participant observation and in-depth interviews because they allow for a nuanced and immersive understanding of cultural life. Participant observation helps me grasp the unspoken, everyday practices that shape community dynamics, things often missed in surveys. It enables long-term rapport building and contextual awareness. In-depth interviews, meanwhile, provide personal narratives and reflections that reveal people's interpretations of their own experiences. I sometimes supplement these methods with focus groups or visual ethnography to capture diverse voices. These qualitative approaches allow me to produce thick description and avoid reducing people to data points. My goal is always to represent lived realities authentically and ethically. 8. How do you ensure cultural sensitivity and avoid bias when conducting research? Ensuring cultural sensitivity starts with acknowledging my own positionality and potential biases. I take time to understand the community's norms, values, and communication styles before initiating research. I use reflexive journaling throughout fieldwork to critically examine how my background might influence interpretations. Collaboration with local participants, co-researchers, or interpreters helps ensure respectful and contextually grounded research. I also obtain informed consent and maintain transparency about my goals and potential impacts. Avoiding assumptions and listening actively to participant perspectives are crucial. Sensitivity means adapting my methods to be respectful, responsive, and ethical while striving to represent communities in ways they find accurate and empowering. 9. Have you ever faced ethical dilemmas during fieldwork? How did you resolve them? Yes, ethical dilemmas are almost inevitable in fieldwork. In one case, a participant disclosed sensitive information that, if made public, could jeopardize their safety. Although they initially consented to be recorded, I chose to anonymize their identity and exclude some details from publication. I also revisited consent with them afterward to ensure comfort with the material used. This experience reinforced my commitment to do no harm and the importance of ongoing, rather than one-time, consent. Ethical fieldwork requires constant evaluation, transparency, and prioritizing the well-being of participants over academic or institutional pressures. I also consult ethical guidelines and, when needed, IRB protocols. 10. How do you handle situations where research participants disagree with your interpretations? I view disagreements with participants not as conflicts but as opportunities for reflection and deeper understanding. When a participant challenges my interpretation, I engage in open dialogue to understand their perspective. I revisit my notes and consider whether my analysis was shaped by personal bias, miscommunication, or cultural misunderstanding. Sometimes, their feedback revealed critical insights I had missed, prompting revisions. I believe co-interpretation strengthens the integrity of ethnographic work. While I may still maintain a critical stance when necessary, I always aim to honor participants' viewpoints and avoid imposing outsider narratives. This process helps ensure ethical and collaborative knowledge production. 11. Can you share an example of how your anthropological research has impacted policy or community development? During a research project on indigenous land use practices, I collaborated with a local NGO advocating for environmental rights. My ethnographic findings highlighted how traditional ecological knowledge contributed to sustainable land management, insights that were often overlooked in formal policy discussions. We co-produced a report that was presented to regional policymakers, leading to the inclusion of community-based conservation practices in new environmental planning. Additionally, local leaders used the research to support their legal claims to ancestral territories. This experience underscored the value of applied anthropology in bridging knowledge systems and informing policy. It also reinforced my commitment to research that benefits the communities involved. 12. How do you engage with local communities to ensure your research is collaborative rather than extractive? I prioritize collaboration from the outset by involving community members in defining research questions and methodologies. Before fieldwork begins, I conduct informal meetings to understand local concerns and ensure mutual expectations are clear. I work with local research assistants, translators, and cultural advisors whenever possible, valuing their input as co-creators of knowledge. I share preliminary findings throughout the process and solicit feedback before publishing or presenting. I also ensure that my work is accessible through community presentations, translated summaries, or practical tools a community can use. This approach fosters trust, accountability, and reciprocity, making research a shared endeavor rather than a one-sided extraction. 13. What strategies do you use to present anthropological findings to non-academic audiences? To communicate with non-academic audiences, I adapt my language, use relatable storytelling, and incorporate visual elements such as photos, infographics, or short videos. I also draw on real-life examples and narratives from my fieldwork to humanize the data and make complex concepts more engaging. Community talks, blogs, public exhibitions, and social media allow for accessible dissemination. I strive to balance clarity with accuracy and avoid jargon while maintaining the cultural integrity of participants' voices. Translating research into policy briefs, educational material, or advocacy tools is another strategy one uses. Ultimately, I aim to make anthropology meaningful and actionable beyond academia. 14. How do you approach the study of globalization and its effects on local cultures? I study globalization not as a uniform force, but as a complex, uneven process that interacts with local cultures in diverse ways. My approach involves analyzing how global economic systems, media, and migration influence identity, tradition, and social organization. I examine both the homogenizing and hybridizing effects, how global trend can threaten cultural practices while also giving rise to new, localized adaptations. I pay close attention to how communities negotiate these changes, often with resilience and creativity. By focusing on local agency within global systems, I aim to challenge simplistic narratives of cultural loss and highlight the dynamic ways people reshape global influences. 15. What are your thoughts on digital anthropology and studying online communities? Digital anthropology is an exciting and essential field that reflects how deeply technology is embedded in our social lives. Studying online communities, whether gaming groups, diaspora forums, or activist networks, reveals how identities, norms, and cultures are constructed and contested in digital spaces. I approach this research with the same ethnographic rigor as traditional fieldwork, using participant observation, interviews, and content analysis in online environments. Ethical considerations are even more crucial, given issues of privacy and anonymity. I find digital anthropology complements offline research, offering insight into translocal connections and new forms of cultural expression. It's a vital tool for understanding 21st century life. 16. How can anthropology contribute to discussions on climate change and environmental justice? Anthropology offers a crucial lens for understanding how climate change impacts communities differently, particularly marginalized groups. By documenting local knowledge systems, coping strategies, and cultural ties to land, anthropologists highlight the human dimension of environmental issues often overlooked in scientific or policy-driven approaches. We can amplify indigenous and local voices in climate discourse, exposing environmental injustices and advocating for equitable adaptation strategies. Anthropology also critiques dominant narratives that ignore historical exploitation, colonial legacies, or socioeconomic inequalities. Through ethnographic research, we provide grounded insights that can inform more inclusive and culturally sensitive climate policy. Our role is both analytical and activist in environmental justice work. 17. How would you teach cultural anthropology to students with no prior background in the subject? I begin by connecting anthropological concept to everyday life, using relatable examples like food, family, or social rituals to demonstrate how culture shapes behavior. I introduce key terms like cultural relativism, ethnocentrism, and participant observation through interactive discussions, films, and case studies. I emphasize open-mindedness, critical thinking, and respect for diversity. Students engage in small ethnographic projects, such as observing local practices or interviewing family members, to apply theory to real-world contexts. I incorporate diverse global perspectives and include contemporary issues to keep the content relevant. My goal is to make students see anthropology not just as a discipline, but as a way of seeing the world. 18. How do you address controversial topics, e.g., cultural appropriation, colonialism, in your work or lectures? I approach controversial topics with openness, context, and critical analysis. I create a respectful classroom environment where students feel safe discussing sensitive issues. I ground these discussions in anthropological theory and historical background, explaining, for example, how colonial legacies continue to shape global inequalities or how cultural appropriation differs from cultural exchange. I use case studies to illustrate complexity and encourage students to reflect on their own positionality. In research, I approach these topics with cultural sensitivity and ethical responsibility, consulting with community members to ensure their perspectives are accurately represented. My aim is to foster awareness, empathy, and informed dialogue. 19. What current anthropological research or trend excites you the most? I'm particularly excited by the growing focus on multi-species ethnography and the anthropology of the environment. This trend explores human-non-human relationships, such as those with animals, plants, and ecosystems, challenging the human-centered perspective of traditional anthropology. It reflects a broader interest in interconnectedness, ecological ethics, and non-Western worldviews that recognize agency beyond humans. This research expands our understanding of kinship, identity, and care across species boundaries, offering profound insights into sustainability and climate resilience. It aligns with decolonial and indigenous perspectives, making anthropology more inclusive and responsive to global crises. I find it intellectually rich and deeply relevant to our time. 20. Where do you see the future of cultural anthropology heading, and how do you fit into that vision? The future of cultural anthropology lies in increased interdisciplinarity, digital engagement, and decolonization. As global challenges like climate change, displacement, and inequality intensify, anthropology must adapt by integrating with environmental science, technology, and activism. The discipline is also reckoning with its colonial past, prompting a shift toward more collaborative, ethical, and inclusive practices. I see my role as both a scholar and facilitator of community voices, using participatory methods and advocating for applied, socially engaged research. I aim to make anthropology accessible beyond academia and relevant to real-world issues. In this evolving field, I hope to contribute meaningful, justice-oriented insights that bridge cultures and disciplines. Thank you for exploring the top 20 cultural anthropologist interview questions and answers. These insights aim to help you prepare effectively and confidently showcase your expertise. Stay informed, stay curious, and continue building your anthropological perspective as you advance in your academic or professional journey. Best of luck in your interview.